Okay, we're live on the prairie. How do you like that? How about, except that it's a prairie in the suburbs of Chicago, Wolf Road Prairie,
Westchester.
in in Westchester, of course, and that's Joel Greenberg, who is a naturalist and author, man about town,
Longtime friend of Mike's.
longtime friend of the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. Peggy's holding up the camera the best she can here, and EJ, and again, your last name?
My last name is Neafsey, Mike.
Right, EJ Neafsey. I wanted to make sure he got that because I would screw it up. And we're tell us, I don't know, Joel, maybe you start about this prairie because we're standing on sidewalk. How does sidewalk get in a prairie?
Okay, well,
All right, are we okay? Oh, you're looking at it, Peggy. Peggy is like
oh,
pulling the
good.
camera
Okay.
down. I'm going, oh, what happened to the camera? No, she's taking a shot of the sidewalk.
Yeah, this site, from a biological standpoint, is one of the richest, best remnant prairies. And what makes it unlike any other is that early attempts to develop it left left sidewalks crisscrossing the site. It was targeted for development in the 1920s, and then the Depression hit to rescue it.
Yay Depression.
Yay Depression, and so the development stopped, and then over time, ordinances changed. So the people that had bought parcels on the property were hindered from developing it, and then conservationists discovered it and took over, and EJ might want to elaborate on that.
Well, in
asset.
the 70s, a group of volunteers and who wanted to save the prairie formed something called the Save the Prairie Society. And in order to save the prairie, they started trying to buy up some of these lots that had been sold in the 1920s and to try to prevent a developer from getting a big parcel. And they ultimately were successful, and in the 90s, the Forest Preserve of Cook County and the Illinois Department of Natural Resources bought the whole prairie, the 80 acres, and dedicated it as a nature preserve in Illinois.
All right, now this prairie, we just walked out a savanna over there. You can get a shot of that, Peggy. And so we got, wow, somebody just fell into the brush there. Okay. We're not even going to tell you what happened. So there's savanna there, and then there's sun prairie here. How important is this? Is it a remnant, and how important is it ecologically?
So, from my own perspective, I mean, created prairies are great, but even the oldest 50 years or so doesn't compare with a 12,000-year-old prairie that's been forming since the ice left, over 10,000 years ago. So it is, I mean, there's only Illinois was a prairie state, but from 1840 to 1900, virtually prairie disappeared. There's only a tiny, tiny fraction of 1% that remains. So it's incredibly important for that. We live, my wife and I live 7 minutes away. If we need a prairie fix, this is where we come. And the other aspect, which we talked about with the sidewalks, that makes it particularly interesting to me, and one reason why I selected this for today's outing was that you see, the cultural overlay of the sidewalks separating this incredibly high quality prairie. So I think it's extraordinarily important place.
It's a ready-made path, and anybody can get to it. We parked on 31st down there. You get out of your car, you walk into the prairie, so you're walking into millennia past, aren't you?
Well, you walk into Illinois before European settlement and all that. This is what was here for thousands and thousands of years. And when they talk about prairies, they call this is an example of what they mean by a remnant. That is, a prairie that was never farmed. There are other prairies that are restorations where a farm is tried to be returned back to a prairie by getting rid of all the crops and planting a lot of prairie plants. But a remnant has the original vegetation and the soil and everything else that's part of a prairie.
Right, and as Joel said, it's might be impossible. We really don't know yet to recreate that. All right, now we've got a lot of plants. The reason I stopped here is there's a lot of plants that you can do quick ID on. It's really rich in plants. So let's start with what.
Let's take a look at these grasses here. So the Illinois, this Wolf Road, and in Illinois in general, we have what are called a tall grass prairie. So these grasses here are over my head. They're 5 or 6 feet tall. The one here is called big blue stem, or otherwise known as turkey foot. You can see why. And right next to it is an example of Indian.
How about some of these forbs here?
Yeah, we have some other plants. So these giant leaves are part of a plant called prairie dock, which is a so-called silphium.
And I have silphium, by the way, growing in my alley, in my backyard. I planted cup plant, and now it's taking over the neighborhood.
Right. And this particular silphium, this particular prairie dock, has a very short shoot, and each one of these balls at the top is going to turn into a yellow sunflower about that big.
How soon will that be?
Well, they'll be the flowers will come out in about 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay.
And a lot of these usually get up 10 or 12 feet high, but not this one. I think because of the lack of rain we had in July. That's my guess.
Okay.
This is the flowering spurge, which is another beautiful prairie flowering plant.
And the nodding onion here.
There's the nodding wild onion, yeah.
Which is what Chicago might have been named after.
For,
yeah.
Right? And then this plant here is a very interesting plant called the smooth white lettuce. And I don't know if it's good for a salad or not. Somebody will probably know. And behind that is the sawtooth sunflower, named because the leaves have kind of a serrated edge, Helianthus grosserratus. And at the top, there's going to be 10 or 20 sunflowers coming out. And in another month, there'll be a couple of million sunflowers here at the prairie.
Now, is this typical of a prairie where you stand in one spot and you can find that many different species here?
It's the essence of a prairie, is the diversity. Just one little spot, you've got 10 or 20 or 50 plants, and there's been a plant list for the prairie created that has 350 different plants on it. So this is a true high-quality prairie.
2 points, too, is that at any given point, at any given place, as EJ said, there's a lot of diversity. But if you look around, you can see subtle differences in elevation. So there's, over there, it's wetter. So you would get, so that diversity is magnified by these subtle differences. And the second point that makes prairies just so remarkable and so worthy of love is in the course of the summer, from May through probably early October even, every 2-3 weeks the aspect changes. So as a new suite of plants start blooming, I mean, now we're getting into yellow. Earlier it might have been mostly blue with the blazing stars, for example. So prairies are constantly changing, and they're extremely, as we said, rich. So, I mean, you come out here every 2 weeks and it's a different show.
All right, we're going to go take a look at that show. We'll be back in maybe, unless we get really wrapped up. Mike Nowak from the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. Thanks for joining us.